Hi, this is Johnnie. I'm going to be going over the edTPA Elementary Assessment Literacy Instruction Task 2, Instructing and Engaging Students in Literacy Learning. And I'll be going with the first two parts now. The first part being what do I need to think about, and the second part being what do I need to do. So let's get started. With the what do I need to think about, let's look at some important things here. In Literacy Instruction Task 2, you will demonstrate how you support and engage students in literacy learning. Before you begin your instruction, you need to think about the following. So let's start with each bullet point. The first bullet point, what kind of learning environment do you want to develop in order to establish respect and rapport and to support your students' engagement and learning? So these two terms, respect and rapport, will come up in the commentary, so you want to keep that in mind before you start your instruction with your students. What kinds of activities, what kinds of talk, what kinds of communication sets out a sense of respect and rapport that you have with your students and the students amongst themselves. The second bullet point, what kinds of learning tasks actively engage in the central focus of the learning segment? Okay, what are you actually doing in your instruction that sits firmly in the central focus? This next bullet point, how will you elicit and build on student responses in ways that develop and deepen content understanding? So your teaching is not going to be solely direct instruction. You will need to have times within your teaching where students are talking with you, discussing things, either in small groups or whole class, ways in which you can hear what they're thinking and then respond to their thinking to help them go further in their learning. And this will come up in one of the prompts as well. So you need to think about eliciting and building on student responses as something central to the teaching you do during this instructional task. The next bullet point, in what ways will you connect new content to your students' prior academic learning and personal, cultural, or community assets during your instruction? Now this falls from your planning task where you've had to really consider where students were in their learning before you begin your instruction, as well as what assets they bring to their learning. So this is the follow-up to that. And the last bullet point in this, what do I need to think about? How will you use evidence from your instruction to examine and change your teaching practices to more effectively meet a variety of student learning needs? So there are two parts to this one. One is paying attention to your teaching so you can make it better. And the second part is being sure that you are teaching all of your students, all the ways that they come to the learning, the variety of students that you have in your classroom. So two things, collecting evidence along the way to examine how to teach better, but also paying attention to how you're teaching everybody. So let's go to the next part. What do I need to do? In this section, it's very pragmatic to start. You obviously will need to start by getting permission to do the video recording. And so your program should have some kinds of forms that set out what you're doing, the intent of the assessment, and how you'll be recording and what the purposes of the recording. And there's a little note here that if you aren't able to get all of your students to give your permission, or all your students' families to give permission to do the video recording for your assessment, then you need to find a way to keep those students out of the video. And if not possible, edTPA suggests that you blur them in the video, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, the next part of this is that, okay, you're going to be doing a video recording. What should you be recording? Well, you want to focus on challenging learning tasks in which the students are doing something, and it should be around the central focus, the essential literacy strategy, and the related skills. Those things matter. And so this last piece, so when you think about which videos to include and send along to edTPA, the video clips you select for submissions to provide a sample of how you interact with students to develop an essential literacy strategy and related skills. Now this part about how you interact is essential, is important, because that's how you're demonstrating your teaching. And that will go back up to eliciting and building on student responses, and connecting to students' prior learning and their cultural assets. So this part right here is about your teaching. So you want to have evidence of your engagement with your students as they're focusing on the essential literacy strategy and related skills. This is pragmatic. Identify the lessons to be recorded. This is pragmatic as well. You need to choose 2 video clips. All right. My suggestion is that you video record all of your lessons as much as possible, especially those points within your lessons where you're focusing on the essential literacy strategy and related skills. But from that collection of recordings, you choose 2 clips, no more than 20 minutes in length, all right? And you can see what is being asked for here. The clips should demonstrate how you interact with students in a positive literacy environment and develop an essential literacy strategy and related skills. So 2 pieces here again. The first is how you interact with students, demonstrating your teaching. And the other one is what kids are learning from your work with them, how you're supporting them to develop an essential literacy strategy and related skills. So how do you work with kids, and how do you set out the learning so that they can be engaged? Okay, so another note here, the 2 clips can come from the same or 2 different lessons in the learning segment, all right? And here's a smart way to think about those 2 clips. The first one being, 1 clip should show how you actively engage students. So that's again, how you interact with students, while modeling the essential literacy strategy, so how you get along with your students. The second clip should show how you support students to practice and apply the essential literacy strategy. All right? Again, 2 things. One is how you work with your students, how you interact with them and connect with them, and the other is how you set out the learning for them through your modeling and teaching. All right? So let's think about a few things here. Some key points. First one is, think about the 3 R's, respect, rapport, and responsiveness that come up here. They will show up in the commentary as well. So respect and rapport is specifically asked for here, but you can think about this elicit and build on student responses as your responsiveness as a teacher, also your opportunities to show respect and rapport as well. And then also this part about connecting to students' prior learning and their cultural and community assets is also a degree of respect, rapport, and also responsiveness. All right? So let's look at the next note. In terms of video recording, you want to video record as much of your lessons as possible. I'll talk about that more in a moment. And clearly, you should be recording segments where you and your students are engaged in the essential literacy strategy and related skills. All right? And lastly, you want to take care in your selection of video clips. These will serve as evidence in your commentary. So you want to have clips in which you're involved with students and the students involved in what you've set out. So there should be dialogue, talk, interaction, and all of that sets you up to have evidence for your commentary. If the students are sitting quietly while you're walking around and not saying much, and the students are doing independent work, and it may be great that they're all focused and doing well on their quiet task, but you don't have much evidence for what's happening in their heads to describe in your commentary. So take good care in selecting your clips. Let's continue. There are some optional things to consider along the way. The first one being, since academic language is such an important part of this task, you can add more video to show how kids are engaging in the language demands of your lessons, right? And you can see the directions here. An additional video clip of 1 or more students using language within a learning segment is possible, but it shouldn't be more than 5 minutes in length. You can also use student work samples to focus on students' language use, all right? Now, here's another choice for you along the way. You can choose in your video clips whether you're focusing on the whole class or a targeted group of students. Now, it is possible to have one video clip do one and the other video clip do the other, and have, maybe your focus students in both clips, your focus students being a part of the whole class at once, and then your focus students being in a clip separate. But you have choices. But make sure that both video clips have at least 4 students involved. Next, you want to video record your classroom teaching. I'm going to add some suggestions here. It says tips for video recording your class are available from your teacher preparation program. Well, I'm going to offer some tips in a moment. Okay. You should select video clips to submit, and you want the clips to do these things, right? One thing is you want to have the video and sound quality solid, clear. What you don't want is the person watching the video having to work to figure out what's going on, what you're saying, what the kids are saying, what's happening, what's going on. It should be clear that if you're teaching your second lesson and your lesson plan says that you're doing these things, your video clip shows that those things are happening. And you just want to make sure that, if you have something that you're saying that is clearly audible, as well as the students, you have opportunities to add on a transcript or embed quotes within the video if the audio isn't working so well. All right. The other consideration you want to do is if you have things written on the board, you want to take pictures of those things, because you can submit those as files of evidence of things that are happening within the class as well. So if you are doing some kind of shared writing, where you're writing something out with the students on chart paper, you want to take a picture of it at the end as a piece of evidence for what happened during that lesson. Okay, the video clip must be continuous and unedited with no interruption in the events. The only split should be between the 2 video clips. And here's a suggestion: if you have kids that aren't supposed to be in your video clip, you can blur their faces if you're able to do that. And you don't want to include the name of the state, school, or district in your video, all right? And you can see the names for the kids that you're working with should be only first names. All right? Let's look at the next bit. The next bit is what you do with this video. Okay, you've gotten great video, you've found your 2 clips. What should you do now? Well, you should respond to the prompts in the literacy instruction commentary. And a lot of that literacy instruction commentary, which we'll hit in a moment, is focused on what happened during the video clips and what evidence of student learning and modeling and respect, rapport, and responsiveness you exhibited. All right? And you see here, determine if additional information is needed to understand what you and the students are doing in the video clips, and you can include this as an additional 2 pages, and so it doesn't mess up the number of pages you're allowed for your literacy instruction. Okay. Now, this is practical down here. This tells you, if you go to this link, you'll find out how and what you're supposed to submit for this task. All right. So let's take a look at some notes here. First off, in terms of video record your classroom teaching, you would do well to have a mentor or a peer mind the camera. You don't want to be thinking about what the camera's doing, whether it's focused, whether it's still recording, whether the batteries run out, or whether some kid has jostled the camera. You want to have a peer teacher, maybe somebody else who's a student teacher, or you want to have your mentor teacher mind the camera. You don't want to be thinking about the camera while you're teaching. You want to be focused on doing your lesson well. Secondly, do use a tripod or stand, even if you are using your smartphone. Things get moved around, kids get busy, things could be pushed around, and you don't want to lose half your lesson because your camera fell off its stand or from the place you've perched it. All right? Next, more practical advice here. You want to put the camera in a place where you can capture the most important activity of the lesson. Now, for a lot of folks, the class modeling or the teacher modeling would be a pan shot. So the camera might be in the back of the classroom trying to capture as much of what's going on in the classroom as possible. You might be mic'd for this with a remote microphone. Your program may have such a thing. If not, then you're going to have to speak really loudly. If you're moving to a group or you have a peer or mentor with you and the kids are doing group work and you're moving to interact with each one of them, you might have the peer or mentor move the camera with you slowly and steadily, just to capture those pieces. So you can imagine you've done some modeling of your essential literacy strategy. The kids are set to work and they're working in small groups. Somebody might take the camera and move with you as you interact with one of those small groups. All right? Do not pan in and out. What you don't want is the video to the form of the video or the way the video has been recorded to be a distraction to the viewer. You want the focus for the viewer to be on what you're doing with your kids and what your kids are doing with the lesson you've set out. And there's one last one here, and this is really important. And this is sometimes not given enough attention. The audio. The audio is probably more important than the video, because when you do the literacy instructional task commentary, which we'll discuss in a moment, the evidence you're going to use to say what you were doing in your teaching, I said this, and my student responded this way, will be auditory commentary. Okay, so those will be things that kids say. You can describe points in the lesson when you're doing things, but evidence of what is said by you and by your students will really help you, especially with a prompt that asks about how you elicited student ideas and how you responded to their ideas. So the auditory will be very, very important. So if you can get mic'd, or you can be especially focused on the quality of the audio for your video as you set things up, that will serve you in the long run. So let's get to the good part. What do I need to write? All right. So literacy instruction commentary, there's some limits here, and you have to be careful with these, because you may want to write so much about all the great teaching you've done, but you only get 6 pages. All right. So be really focused on the prompts and address them as specifically as possible. And as was said before, you can add 2 additional pages to describe what's going on in the video recording. And part of that is about how students are using language in your classroom. All right, so keep those things in mind. Now, let's get to the actual prompts. Start off with the first prompt. So you need to say which lesson or lessons are shown in the video clips based on your plans. This is lesson 3, in which I am, etc., etc. Okay, so you need to identify the lessons by the lesson plan number. All right. Next, you need to refer to scenes in the video clips where you provided a positive learning environment. And a word of caution here, because of edTPAs I've seen and commentaries I've seen, avoid comments that are negative about your students. This particular group of students weren't focused. Don't say something like that. This particular child has struggled throughout the year paying attention. Don't use commentaries like that. You want to be focused on how you're setting up a positive learning environment. All right. So that could be in how you set out your directions, how you were explicit about the expectations for the lesson, how you focus students in a positive way, how you gave encouragement to their focus. Anything like that. Those things are about positive learning environment. And you can see the points that follow. How did you demonstrate mutual respect for, rapport with, and responsiveness to students with varied needs and backgrounds, and challenge students to engage learning? Okay, so this particular prompt is loaded, so you should give good detail to this one. The first part of it has 3 parts: respect, rapport, responsiveness. Okay, so you should address each one of those, and that could be how you talk to the students, the proximity you had with the students, the questions you asked of them. Rapport might be the ease you have with them, and responsiveness would be how did you take up their questions or thoughts and move them to another place. Now, taking that into consideration, you need to go to the next piece, which is students with varied needs and backgrounds. So this respect, rapport, and responsiveness isn't generic to everybody. You need to think about all the particular kids you have in your class, and perhaps your focus students as well. So perhaps you have students who are highly engaged and you ask them really, really complex questions, or you might have a student who's a bit shy and reticent about participating. How did you ask the right question or give the right amount of encouragement for that student? So remember, varied needs and backgrounds. So, but this isn't all about just being sweet and nice to your students, all right? This isn't about just saying you're great kids and we're doing great things today. It has to be folded around challenging them in engaging their learning, okay? So you're not just being the sweetest, nicest teacher, you're challenging them and showing respect, rapport, and responsiveness along the way. So this particular prompt is very loaded. Give it some time and some thought. Think about addressing each one of these in turn and making sure that you talk about more than one student in which you showed these things. Remember, the evidence can come from things you said in the video. It could also perhaps come from feedback you gave on their work. Okay, but you should focus on what's happening in the video. How did you show those things? So when the viewer looks at your video, they can see the kind of respectful teacher you were. All right? Here are definitions that edTPA sets out for these. So let's look at this for a moment. edTPA's definition for rapport: a close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well with each other. Okay, so think about that as what you want to have happening within your class. So this part about mutual respect means it's not just respect between you and the students, it's about respect between amongst the students as well. Under respect, a positive feeling of esteem or deference for a person and specific actions and conduct representative of that esteem. Respect can be a specific feeling of regard for the actual qualities of the one respected. It can also be conduct in accord with a specific ethic of respect. Rude conduct is usually considered to indicate a lack of respect, disrespect, whereas actions that honor somebody or something indicate respect. Note that respectful actions and conduct are culturally defined and may be context dependent. All right? So that's how edTPA describes respect and rapport. Keep that in mind. Now we need to go to part 3, engaging students in learning. All right. So, important here, refer to examples from the video clips in response to these prompts. All right? So you need to use timestamps at 2:38 in the video clip 1, at 3:44 in the second video clip, etc. You want to explain how your instruction engaged students in developing the essential literacy strategy and related skills. Okay? What was your instruction doing for these two things? And remember, always give attention to each of these. That shows up in the rubrics too. So discuss how your instruction engaged the students in the essential literacy strategy, and discuss how your instruction engaged students in developing the related skills, the skills that support the essential literacy strategy. Following that, describe how your instruction linked students' prior academic learning and personal, cultural, and community assets with new learning. Again, take this into two pieces. What did your instruction do for, or connect to, or link to? How did your instruction link to what they already knew about the subject? Okay, that's part one. The second part being, how did your instruction link to who they are as people? What they brought to the classroom that's not necessarily school related. Okay? Personal, cultural, and community assets. So think about it as two pieces. How did your instruction work with prior learning? How did your instruction work with who the kids are? All right? So let's look at the next part, part 4, deepening student learning through instruction. All right, so let's get to our favorite part about rapport and respect and eliciting student responses. So refer to examples from the video clips again, okay, so with timestamps. Explain how you elicited and built on student responses to promote thinking, and apply the essential literacy strategy using related skills, okay? So this means you need to have interactions within your video where you're asking students to present their ideas in some form. Now, they could be writing something on the board, you could be having a discussion about something, you could be writing together on some chart paper, a response to a text. You need to be describing how you worked with what kids offered you. First off, you have to set yourself up to have students offering you their ideas. And as they're offering your ideas and thinking, how are you responding to them? Okay? How are you building on those responses to take things a bit further? So this is real-time teaching. You can't anticipate this, but you should have ideas about what kids might say about the activity you're doing, through the modeling you're doing, the questions you ask, that sets them up to give you some ideas about what they're thinking about, and then you want to build on those ideas. All right, so this one is also quite thick. All right, so make sure that you have that opportunity within your teaching that you can respond to this prompt. The next one's a bit more practical. Explain how you modeled the essential literacy strategy. Okay, so that's clear. But then how you supported them along the way as they practiced or applied the strategy. So as you remember, 2 video clips. One video clip might be much about your instruction. The second video clip might be about how you supported them. So you can imagine in your lessons, after you've done some modeling or instruction, students are working at something on their own or with peers, or you're working on it together. What kinds of supports do you put in place? What kinds of questions, what kinds of tools, what kinds of materials are you using to support students around the essential literacy strategy? Okay. The next part, analyzing teaching. In this one, you want to refer again to examples from the video clips, and you've seen that again and again and again, so that's why you have to have such a good set of video clips. You want to think about your teaching. So this is the part about, okay, I've taught my lessons, what would I do better? Now you want to be careful here because you want to make changes to your instruction, but you want to keep in mind how those changes will matter to the whole class, but then also to particular students, all right? And or for students who need greater support or challenge. Okay, so you need to do both. So think about your lessons. Overall, how do my lessons support and move kids in their learning? What might I do better? And then thinking about particular kids who might need some support. How might I challenge them in the future? Okay, and then of course, down here they describe the kinds of kids you might consider. All right, consider the variety of learners in your class. All right, so there are a lot of notes for this one because this one is quite thick. Let's start off with the 3 R's. So the 3 R's are respect, rapport, and responsiveness. And those are things you have to think about throughout the instructional task, as was described here in this very heavy prompt here. So think about them as the 3 R's. As I'm teaching, how am I enacting the 3 R's? How am I showing respect? How am I showing rapport? And how am I being responsive to my students? All right, so the 3 R's. Next, let's think about how were your students engaged in both the essential literacy strategy and related skills? As I've said, you need to be thinking about these always in tandem, all right? So explain how your instruction engaged students in developing an essential literacy strategy and related skills. They always go together. So don't neglect one for the other, okay? And how did your teaching take into account students' prior learning and who they are? Again, the 2 parts. What they've learned, okay, how are you using what they've learned about this particular literacy idea, and how are you being responsive, how are you incorporating who they are outside of school, their persons, right? Next, you want to explain how you elicited and built on student responses. So you want to consider, how did you draw out students' thinking? So anticipate that you're going to have to interact with students in ways that they give you their ideas. So what kinds of questions, what kind of prompts, how are you going to set yourself up so that students show you their thinking? So how did you draw out students' thinking so that you work with their ideas? How are you going to work with their ideas? Next, the modeling part. You want to be showing how. Okay, so how are you doing your teaching? How to do that thing that you want students to learn. So modeling is showing how, but you also have to wrap it together with support. What kinds of tools and practices are you using that enable students to engage in the learning? So showing how and supporting. Okay, and lastly, just a general suggestion for you with this last prompt, the analyzing teaching prompt. A good idea is to make notes at the end of each lesson. So you've taught the lesson, you've had 45 minutes, an hour, however long that is. You get out your notebook, write down what you're thinking, just off the top of your head, what worked, what didn't work. The other thing to do is if you've had students do some particular kind of work for that lesson, you set it out in front of you, you look through students' work. That will inform you on the things that you'll need to be thinking about for the subsequent lesson. All right? So that also tells you who needs help, some things about the whole class, if you're looking at their whole class work. But as you look at students' work, you need to be thinking about particular kids as well, and what you might do in a different, as if you were to reteach this lesson. All right? So this particular section of the commentary is quite thick. And there's this one last piece to the commentary here. And it's on a second page, but don't neglect it. Okay? You need to describe how you think your changes, the ones you set out in the prior prompt in 5A, will improve students' learning. Now you want to support your explanation with evidence from student learning and principles from theory and or research. Okay? So try to tie that theory to the essential literacy strategy, related skills. Using general theory about students' learning may be okay, but the more specific you can be about what would make your lesson better for your particular kids based on principles from research, the better. And just a general comment here. You want to be referring to student work samples and video. And again, use principles that focus on how students best learn the essential literacy strategy and related skills. All right? Now we're going to get to the rubrics, and there are 5 of them. So let's take a look here. Rubric 6, remember you're asked to set up a positive literacy learning environment. So this is about the literacy learning environment. Okay. How does the candidate demonstrate a positive literacy learning environment that supports students' engagement in learning? Now again, 3 is passing, but I'm going to suggest focusing on 4. 3 says the candidate demonstrates rapport with and respect for students. Okay, that's reasonable. And, so this is necessary, the candidate provides a positive low-risk learning environment that reveals mutual respect among students. Now you can see the key words here are low risk. So we need to think about what can we do to make that better. So this isn't so demanding. This means that you're working positively with your students, you're interacting with them in a collegial way, helping them think about things, and the kids are getting along with each other. So that's a 3. Let's think about what a 4 should be. So if we look at the top of this prompt, we'll see that the top of the prompt is the same. The candidate demonstrates rapport with and respect for students. So that's the same as 3. And, okay, so here are the differences. Whereas 3 was positive low-risk learning environment, the candidate to reach a 4 needs to provide a challenging learning environment. Okay? And where it says in 3 reveals mutual respect among students, you need to set up the possibility, you need to establish the expectation that students will respect each other. So you need to promote mutual respect among students. And that may just be having students talk with each other around their work, encouraging your students to encourage one another, So you can see the differences between 3 and 4. The difference being you need to provide a challenging learning environment and you need to promote mutual respect among your students. All right. For the 7th rubric, engaging students in learning, how does the candidate actively engage students in integrating strategies and skills to comprehend or compose text? Okay, so what are you doing to get kids to do what you care them to do in this learning segment? So let's look at 3. 3 says students are engaged in learning tasks that address their understanding of the essential literacy strategy and related skills. It's always the pair, essential literacy strategy, related skills. So kids are doing the thing that you've asked them to do. And then in terms of what you're doing with what students bring to their work, you're linking their prior academic learning to their new literacy learning. Now remember, in edTPA, this is one of the 2 things you need to be considering always with your students. The prior learning is one thing, but it's not sufficient. If we want to go to 4, let's see what the 4 asks for. Under 4, you can see that students are engaged in learning tasks that integrate. That's greater than address. So instead of just addressing the literacy strategy and the related skills, you need to be integrating them, all right? So that's taking that to a different level, and you need to have really great understanding of how the related skills work with and matter to the essential literacy strategy. Okay, so this is the next level up, and you can see that there's an addition here in the bottom part. Whereas in 3, candidate links prior academic learning to new literacy learning. Under 4, candidate links prior academic learning and personal, cultural, and community assets to new literacy learning. So this is the 2-part piece you need. What have kids been what did kids bring to this learning segment from their prior schooling, and what do they bring in their persons based on who they are, where they come from, what kind of person they are, their community and cultural assets. So that's the distinction between a 3 and a 4. So you should be shooting for a 4. Under rubric 8, deepening student learning. So how does the candidate elicit student responses to promote thinking and applies the essential literacy strategy and related skills to comprehend or compose text? Okay, so how did you pull out what students were thinking and then do something with that thinking to help them learn more about the essential literacy strategy and related skills? Right, under a 3, candidate elicits students' responses to support the use of, okay, the 2, the essential literacy strategy and the related skills, okay? So you've asked students to talk about the things that matter and related to the literacy strategy and related skills, okay? So you've elicited the responses. The question that you need to be considering is, okay, now that you have those ideas, what are you doing with them? So if we think about the move from a 3 to a 4, you can see that you're asked to do a lot more with what you've elicited. The ideas that your students have given you, what are you doing with them? In a 4, that you've elicited their ideas, and then you've built on the student responses to explicitly portray, extend, and clarify. So this is taking what students offer you. You've set yourself up for students to tell you about their learning, and you're pushing it. You're taking it further, all right, in regards to the essential literacy strategy and related skills. Now, here's an important distinction between 3 and 4. Well, a couple. Obviously, you have to do much more building on and extending what the students have offered you in their thinking. But you also notice here that this is about the use of the essential literacy strategy or related skills. Okay, to be a 4, it has to be both the essential literacy strategy and the related skills. So 3 should be easy enough to get, but you can see what's possible with 4, and of course 4 is better teaching, the kind of teaching you want to aspire to. Let's take a look at the next rubric. All right, so rubric 9 is subject-specific pedagogy, elementary literacy. How does the candidate support students to learn, practice, and apply the essential literacy strategy for comprehending or composing text in a meaningful context? Level 3 is the candidate models. Okay, remember models comes with support, so we need to think about that too. Candidate models the essential literacy strategy to comprehend or compose text with limited opportunities to practice. Okay, so this is a lot about you showing kids how to do things, and they get to do something with it. Maybe not much, but you are doing teaching. You are showing kids how to do things. They may not be doing as much as they should be doing with that strategy. All right, let's take a look at a 4. So how does 4 build on 3? If we look here, 3 says candidate models, 4 says candidate explicitly teaches students how to apply the essential literacy strategy. All right, so this is much more focused and intentional. And you can see down here, instead of with limited opportunities for practice, you need to have opportunities for practice that are set in your lessons. So candidate explicitly teaches students how to apply the essential literacy strategy to comprehend or compose text, and provides opportunities for guided practice. So instead of limited opportunities within your lessons, students are doing work around your essential literacy strategy, and it's evident. So this is 9. And the last rubric for the instructional task, analyzing teaching effectiveness. How does the candidate use evidence to evaluate and change teaching practice to meet students' varied learning needs? Let's hold on to the last part again, varied learning needs. Okay, as I talked about earlier, you can think about how to improve your lessons for the whole class, but you also need to be thinking about for particular kids. So let's look at what a 3 would be, which would be passing. Candidate proposes changes that address students' collective learning needs related to the central focus. So obviously this is about whole class changes. And then the second part, candidate makes superficial connections to research and/or theory. So that means throwing in some research principle that has something to do with either the subject or about how students learn. Now moving to a 4. In a 4, the candidate proposes changes that address individual and collective needs. So again, the difference being you're moving from collective learning to particular students as well. So in your write-up, you can imagine that you're talking about 1 or 2 kids that need a particularly different approach to the teaching, and collective needs. So when you do the commentary, remember, you need to be writing about both those things. You can say, for the whole class, I noticed these things, and in the future, I will be doing, if I were to teach this lesson again, I would go about it this way. I also noticed that these 3 students struggled with such and such and such and such, and I would do this approach for them that should support them. So individual and collective learning needs. Okay, and then the last part, instead of superficial connections, candidate makes connections to research and/or theory. They're not saying you have to have great connections. Okay, you don't need to go the opposite of superficial, but the connections to research and/or theory should be relevant to the things you've set out for the whole class and for the individual students. It shouldn't be just, here's some research that sort of fits with what I hope to be doing, and if I were to teach this lesson again. Make the research suit and support your decisions about how you would make changes for your instruction. All right, so this was a talk on the elementary literacy instructional task. I've given you a lot of ideas about how to go about recording the videos, about selecting data, gone through the commentary, we've talked about the 3 R's, respect, rapport, and responsiveness, and I've gone through in a detailed way the 5 rubrics you have to consider along the way. So do shoot for 4s, because if you don't get to a 4, you're going to get a 3 and you'll pass. So do keep that in mind. I do hope this has been helpful to you.